Good evening and welcome to the show tonight. Well, we have a big exclusive coming up in one moment. Explosive tapes expose New South Wales school teachers' plot to bring the Gaza conflict into the classroom, and the wife of a cabinet minister has been disciplined for her pro-Palestinian activism. Those exclusive audio recordings are coming up in just a moment. Also tonight, big news as Ron DeSantis pulls out of the race to the White House. He acknowledges Donald Trump is the clear favourite. Is it only a matter of time before Nikki Haley pulls the plug too? Liz Storer and Joe Hildebrand will join me to discuss. And Anthony Albanese breaks his election promise on stage 3 tax cuts. That breaking news coming up. And as Benjamin Netanyahu pours cold water on a Palestinian state, a high-profile Israeli government spokesman will join me live. But first tonight, explosive tapes lift the lid on plans to bring anti-Israel advocacy into the school curriculum. And a government minister's wife is caught at a meeting discussing plans to protest outside the Premier's office. Well, I can tonight reveal that a New South Wales cabinet minister's wife has been disciplined by the Department of Education for pro-Palestinian activism at the public school where she teaches. But despite this action, the Emergency Services Minister Jihad Dib's wife, Erin, was part of a small group of teachers on Friday plotting a protest outside the office of Chris Minns, Anthony Albanese or Jason Clare. Erin Dib is a teacher at Burwood Girls High, and she offered during this meeting to help produce a booklet to distribute at schools that accuses Israel of genocide, and it explains how to get around the Education Department Code of Conduct. Sky News has obtained an exclusive audio recording of the Teachers for Palestine group meeting on Friday. It was held over Zoom and attended by about 15 people. Erin Dib discloses who her husband is as they debate which politician's office to rally outside of.
You know, we could just call it a Palestine Solidarity Day, wear T-shirts, keffiyeh, badges, and we could have a rally somewhere. I don't know if people have got ideas for a location. You could do it at Parliament. You could do it at Chris Minns' office. We could do it at Anthony Albanese's office. We could do it the Education Department. Maybe that's a bit too removed unless they get, particularly trying nasty.
Jason Clare makes sense. Or Minzy. Okay. Do we want to decide on that right now?
Sorry, can I just also be totally transparent, because I think it's good, and just let everybody know who doesn't already that my husband is also Jihad Dib, who is the state member for Bankstown. I just want to put that out there so that everybody knows. So just to be totally transparent.
Well, the group settled on a protest outside of Jason Clare's office, the Federal Education Minister, on Tuesday, the 13th of February. And they say that on that day, teachers attending public schools will wear the Palestinian keffiyeh, that's the checkered black and white scarf, into classrooms in a public show of support with the Palestinians. They say otherwise they'll wear Palestinian badges or Teachers for Palestine T-shirts into school. And they plan to use the day to call for Australia to break all ties with Israel. This is school teachers we're speaking about. Break all ties with Israel, to call for a ceasefire to stop the genocide, and to demand that the Education Department stop silencing voices for Palestine. Now, during this strategy meeting on Friday, the school teachers admit that they've taken ideas from the Black Lives Matter movement in the US.
Palestine Solidarity Day, T-shirts, badges, keffiyehs, culminating in a small little short rally at Jason Clare's office. Did we need to talk about about wearing T-shirts into schools?
You do get some principals raising, code of conduct type issues. The original idea of T-shirts came from the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States where hundreds of teachers wore Black Lives Matter T-shirts into schools there. And then teachers in Victoria did it for refugees.
The teachers also discussed their plans in the future to bring the Middle East war into the school curriculum. They say they want to teach children about Gaza in maths classes and even in English. And they claimed that Victorian teachers are already doing this.
It's something the Victorian group is doing, and so I just wanted to let people know it's something we could consider in future. So the idea comes out of Oakland teachers in California, who've got quite an active union, held a teach-in for Palestine. And basically what they did is they got teachers to teach something about Palestine and connect it to the curriculum they were doing. So if, I'm a maths teacher, I might talk about how you can use numbers to describe what's happening in Gaza, or, you're doing English, you can do a Palestinian text, or, so on and so forth, as a corrective to the beyond biased media that we're getting. Obviously that ruffles a few feathers. It could be considered industrial action. On the other hand, not necessarily, because it also fits quite well into some curriculum areas.
Clearly, the thought of school children being indoctrinated by this one-sided rubbish during maths lessons and English classes is outrageous. Our children, many of them, are falling behind on their NAPLAN results already. We know literacy and numeracy standards across Australia are going backwards. And it's because some school teachers are obsessed with rubbish like this instead of actually educating our children. Well, Erin Dibb said she'd speak with her husband about whether he'd take part in their activism, but she lamented that despite him being personally pro-Palestinian, as a minister, his hands were tied. Have a listen.
I haven't really seen what Jihad has said so far, but I wonder if there's any opportunity to work with him on any of our actions. Would he be open to, for example, speaking at a pro-Palestine rally that we're involved in?
I can certainly ask. As a minister, I've discovered that his hands are much more tied than he'd like them to be. That's as far as, signing documents and all sorts, and what he's actually allowed to say. He is very pro-Palestinian, but I'll ask. I can't make that decision for him, and I don't know what he's allowed to do, but I can certainly put it to him, and I can certainly ask.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to exclusive audio recordings of a Teachers for Palestine meeting on Friday, where they discuss plans to rally outside a politician's office. And involved in this discussion about whether to protest outside the office of Premier Chris Minns, the wife of a cabinet minister in his own government. Emergency Services Minister Jihad Dibb's wife, Erin, also speaks about the fact that she's already been disciplined by the Department of Education for her own activism. And Sky News can reveal the directive to discipline her came from the directors in the department.
Sorry, can I just ask, by formally disciplined, because I did get disciplined by my director for what I did at school. So does that count as a formal discipline or not? My principal got a directive from the director that I had to be spoken to, other teachers had to be interviewed, and then I was spoken to about 3 times within that week. My principal was very supportive, but I was spoken to about 3 times, and then basically everything was shut down within the school. So I'm not sure whether that's considered a formal directive, but that's what was said.
Yeah, nothing in writing.
Nothing in writing, but my principal had to put every interview that she had with me and everything that was done in writing and showed me that. And it was sent back, and then she was told very clearly about what she had to say to staff, and what she wrote was then changed, and she had to put something different back to staff.
So it was in writing, yeah.
A spokesman from the New South Wales Education Department confirmed this action and told us today that a Burwood Girls High School teacher was counselled last year about communications on the conflict in the Middle East. The principal has apologised and the school has offered wellbeing support to staff and students. We have sent a message to schools acknowledging some students and staff may be affected by the current conflict in the Middle East and have reminded them of the resources and support in place, including counselling services. Now, on this call, Erin Dibb wasn't alone. Other teachers discussed how they'd also been disciplined for their pro-Palestinian activism on school grounds.
Similarly, I got pulled into a meeting with my director and principal, and the principal sent me a summary of that meeting, but it wasn't a formal warning. It was their way of subtly trying to, or informally trying to threaten.
And then the director was brought in, and at that point I contacted the Federation, and someone from the Federation actually came into the school and talked to the teachers about what the department can and cannot do. And the Federation had voted that with the keffiyeh being worn.
So despite the fact that she was already subject to disciplinary action, Erin Dibb seems unfazed by the Code of Conduct requirements that require teachers to be impartial. And she then, in this call on Friday, offered to help organise a booklet that accuses Israel of genocide. The teachers also discussed ways to get around the Code of Conduct. And the booklet that Erin Dibb is helping to produce even has a section that explains to teachers what they should say if their principal pulls them up on their advocacy.
Yeah, so we produced one late last year. Yeah, it's like an 8-page, colour booklet. I think it was titled, Why We Can't Be Neutral on Genocide. And then had several pages in there kind of explaining, what Israel's doing, why teachers need to speak out about it, why the government, which is asking us to be neutral, is not itself neutral and has been supporting Israel. And then, had some information there about how the union is supporting us to, for example, wear the keffiyeh, take other, wear other kind of things to school, and to explain if you get pulled up by the principal for doing that, what your kind of recourse to protection is. And then also had some, I think, teaching resources in there for teaching about Palestine.
Well, Erin Dibb offered to help produce an updated version of this booklet, and she asked what it involved. One teacher said that this booklet will be distributed at schools, and as you heard there, it mounts the case for Israel committing genocide, a case that's completely inaccurate, that's nonsense. But this teacher says that the booklet could be used to recruit more staff to their cause.
Educating people about that and kind of also using it as a way of finding out who's pro-Palestine in the workplace and who we can organise to work with us.
And in several instances throughout this Zoom meeting just on Friday, the Teachers for Palestine group refer to Zionists. As you know, that's people, usually Jews, who support Israel in a disparaging way. Have a listen.
Randa was going to give me a call. She was a little bit worried what happens if Zionists turn up.
Just had a few Zionist trolls coming into this meeting.
Wouldn't want Zionist trolls around, would you? Now, the Teachers for Palestine group is clearly, very clearly, no question about it, ignoring the Education Department Code of Conduct that stipulates politics should not interfere in schools. The group apparently has no concern for how Jewish students or teachers may feel in such an environment. These teachers want to bring the divisive conflict right into public schools.
Israel said the war is going to go on for a year, irrespective of what happens at the International Court of Justice. And so I think we do want to look to make Palestine visible in our schools. I think, our rulers are trying to cover up a genocide which is happening in full public view, and to do that they use various tactics. They try and accuse us of anti-Semitism. They use Islamophobia around Hamas. And one of the things, I think, in a lot of the reporting, they just stopped talking about it a lot. And I think we want to make it visible.
This is extremely troubling. Their overall objective, as you just heard it, to make the claims of genocide visible in public schools. It's obvious that bringing this topic into the classroom, including, as I said, the inaccurate claim that Israel is engaging in genocide, would make Jewish teachers and students feel unsafe, threatened, alienated and bullied. What right does any public teacher have to bully and intimidate fellow teachers or children who don't agree with their radical views, who believe Israel has a right to exist and a right to defend itself, who believe that Israel now has an obligation to defeat Hamas, that Israelis shouldn't have to live with barbaric terrorists on their doorstep? But these teachers claim Israel is engaging in genocide. They speak as though Zionists are the enemy. This is antagonising towards Jewish students who support a Jewish homeland. These teachers can do what they like in private. We have freedom of speech in this country, but they absolutely cannot bring this war into public school classrooms. We can't have children feeling unsafe and intimidated in taxpayer-funded public schools. The Education Department Code of Conduct states that employees have a right to participate in political and community activities in a private capacity, but it says, and I quote, "It is important to retain public confidence in public education and ensure the department remains apolitical and professional. As a department employee, you must not participate in private political activities while on duty or on work premises." An Education Department spokesman confirmed to us today that all of this activism is against the Code of Conduct. They told us in a statement that teachers are expected to be politically neutral during class, on school grounds, or any time they identify as a school teacher. They say they provide clear guidance around this for all of our employees in their Code of Conduct, and they've reminded staff of their obligations to remain politically neutral. They say any department employee, including teachers, in breach of the code will be subject to appropriate action. They say this Teachers for Palestine group isn't affiliated with the Education Department. They say they don't endorse its activity. But in this call on Friday, the teachers mock the Education Department. They clearly don't take their obligation of impartiality seriously. They say it's simply a bluff.
I think that was good for giving people a bit of confidence that we could do something despite, the bluff about code of conducts and all this sort of stuff.
Why do they think it's a bluff? Because they say no one has been formally disciplined.
Yeah, for instance, there's a little bit, I just posted the link in the chat, so if you want to have a quick look at it now, but there's a little section here around what our pressure is doing in terms of teachers being disciplined, and it just sort of points out that no one has been formally disciplined yet by the Department of Education, and that's in part due to the resolutions carried out passed by the Teachers Federation. So yeah, there's pressure to be neutral, but no one has yet been formally disciplined.
So if these teachers are right and there have been no formal proceedings for any of the teachers who've clearly breached the Code of Conduct, well, then it's just like the fact that no one's been arrested over the Opera House protest and none of the hate preachers have been charged with hate speech, even though those laws exist. And maybe these radical teachers are right, because it does seem that the Education Department is turning a blind eye. Because concerned teachers contacted the Education Department with this recording that I'm playing you tonight, but the department refused to receive it. They wouldn't allow it to be sent to them. They didn't want to know about a recording where teachers were discussing future plans to turn English and maths lessons into indoctrination on Gaza. Well, turning away isn't going to stop the problem. The New South Wales and Victorian premiers need to toughen up and realise what's happening in schools, what's unfolding under their watch, and make sure teachers adhere to the Code of Conduct. Make sure that there are ramifications if they don't. Because this is all only creating more anti-Semitism and more erosion of social cohesion in our society. We don't need this activism being brought into the classroom. We don't need our youngest generation being radicalised by extremist teachers. Sky News hosts Liz Storer and Joe Hildebrand join me now. Joe, what's your reaction to what I've just played then?
It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Firstly, it's just incredibly undergraduate. I mean, teachers talking like this, talking about how our rulers are suppressing this. The only ruler a teacher should be concerned about is the 30-centimetre long piece of wood. And then, you know, and again, you know, we say you can't bring politics in the classroom. We all know that, you know, anyone who's got young children know how impressionable they are. They come home saying anything they've heard or paid attention to in class, they speak it like the gospel truth. These guys, of course, would say, oh, but it's not political. It's just the facts. It's just the truth that, you know, they're trying to cover up. And then says that, you know, criticising Hamas is Islamophobic. Having said all that, Jihad Dib is one of the finest educators, and he's now an MP, I've ever known. He's a dear friend of mine. He's a man of enormous integrity. I have no doubt that he would have absolutely no truck with this whatsoever and would be feeling excruciatingly embarrassed right now. By his
own wife, surely not.
Sadly, yes. I'm sure he's not going to, you know, he's not going to cut her loose. But he would be feeling very embarrassed. He's a very close political and personal ally of Chris Minns and has been for a long time, since before he was leader. So the idea that these chumps were going to target Chris Minns' office, or they were considering that, is doubly embarrassing. Again, same with Jason Clare, one of the finest politicians you will ever meet. Not a speck of anything improper in his entire political history.
Well, Jason Clare's going to have these radical teachers outside of his office.
And again, it's very depressing.
Look, these guys have read the rule book. This has happened throughout history. The Soviet Union had Komsomol. Third Reich had Hitler's Youth. The Chinese Communist Party youth movement has been churning away since Mao's China. Like, this has literally been part of the rule book for any radical left. You just need to look at the way that they've radicalised children over climate change. And as we've seen yet again, they are lumping all these hard left issues into the one basket. Children, in their eyes, are a people group to be mobilised, and it works beautifully because kids don't have the knowledge base or the critical thinking skills to push back on any of this. They're also far less likely to stand up to authority. So if this is what their teachers are telling them is so, this is what they're going to believe. And we've seen this in the school walkouts that have already occurred across our nation in, I've forgotten how many states now, definitely Queensland, definitely Victoria, definitely New South Wales. And then they're blasted all over the news, infecting even more minds. This is straight out of the radical left playbook. And these guys know, as we all know, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And it's a massive red flag to parents, because unless parents are asking and finding out about this kind of stuff, nobody ever gets pulled up. I would love to know how his wife did get pulled up those first few times. Oh, yeah. Because surely, in my mind, to my way of thinking, that's not a fellow teacher. That is kids who you are telling this kind of stuff to, going home and maybe mentioning it to a parent or two, and the parent contacting the school. It goes from there.
Yeah. Joe, big news today that Ron DeSantis has pulled out of the presidential race. So this leaves Donald Trump or Nikki Haley as the potential Republican nominees. Do you think it's only a matter of time before Nikki Haley accepts that she doesn't have the numbers either?
Quite possibly, and it should be only a matter of time before Joe Biden accepts that he can't possibly run and gets tapped on the shoulder and stands aside for a Democratic candidate who can actually beat Trump, because this is all looking absolutely catastrophic for the Democrats. It is staggering to think that, according to the sort of 3D chess theory of their campaign strategy, that they were actually trying to kind of box Trump into a corner where he became the Republican candidate because he was so oppressed and so martyred by all the lawsuits and the prosecutions against him, that he'd get that sympathy vote and that would put him up into contention because he was the only candidate that Joe Biden could beat. Well, guess what? Doesn't look like Joe Biden can beat him anymore. And again, it goes back to all those knuckle draggers, all those posh, supposed intellectual, smart lefties who thought that once Joe Biden beat Trump in 2020 that it was all over. But this is the thing, though. Like, and again, I kept saying
the Democrats. It's thanks to all of the civil cases that Trump is probably going to be president again. But Liz, I mean, you look at Ron DeSantis. Early last year, he was looking like the front runner. I mean, it's been such an enormous change in fortunes politically for him.
It is, but he has simply read the leaves. Like, this was going to happen. Nothing is going to stop the Trump train. And the allegations that Trump's now coming out with, saying these guys, the Dem-leaning, the left-leaning in this country, are literally getting people to show up to the primaries and vote Haley, because now they know, and it's blatantly obvious, Haley is the only chance of beating Trump. Look at New Hampshire right now. They've still got 42% of their voters are not yet aligned with either party, so, which means that they can go to either primaries, Democratic or Republican, and vote in those primaries. And there's literally organisations like the one run by Robert Schwartz, it's called Primary Pivot, and he's come out saying that exact thing, saying we are getting people to go to these Republican primaries in New Hampshire and vote for Haley. We don't care about Haley, we just want to damage Trump. That's a direct quote, by the way. We just want to damage Trump. They know now DeSantis is out of the way. Haley is our only chance. And if you know anything about Haley's ideologies, she is the establishment's pick.
Yeah. All right, let's have a look at the public broadcaster now. Yes. There's a new chairperson coming up to replace Ita Buttrose. There's a lot of attention on who this could be. These are the three contenders. The first is Louise Herron. She's the current chief executive of the Sydney Opera House. Peter Tonner, former Foxtel boss, and New Zealander David Kirk, who was the former boss of Fairfax Media. But, Joe, when you think about the fact that Ita Buttrose was a coalition pick, very tough woman, has been very supportive to me in my career, but she's extremely tough. And she couldn't make a difference at the ABC in terms of changing the culture, fixing the bias problems that they have. It almost doesn't matter who they put at the helm because the staff just rule the whole place.
Yeah, it's quite something, isn't it? I mean, I think Peter Tonner would be a fantastic pick. I think he's a really decent man and very smart and comes from the middle, ex-News Corp, ex-Foxtel, and very nice. He once got me tickets to Warner Brothers Movie World. That's the real reason I'm saying.
Well, that's why he should be head of the ABC.
He's a great guy. He's a really good, decent, smart guy.
Over here. Just buy him some tickets.
The problem is, right, that with the advent, in particular, of social media, the loudest criticism of the ABC has been that it's too right-wing. And I know that seems impossible for anyone in the middle to think, but that is what people do. This is why the trolls on Twitter go after people like Lee Sales, who's straight as an arrow. This is why people jump up and down about Ita Buttrose being made chair in the first place, let alone being able to change anything. You know, this is why you have people like Antoinette Lattouf and Stan Grant saying that ABC is this terrible racist organisation. It's amazing to watch, but the problem is that all the pressure, a bit like Anthony Albanese dropping the stage 3 tax cuts, all the loudest voices are on the left. Even if to do what they are demanding would be political suicide, and you're seeing it, you know, hopefully not, but possibly with the Labor government, and you're seeing it with the ABC.
All right, well, we're out of time tonight. Joe Hildebrand, Liz Story, thank you both so much. Liz, we'll see you tonight at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, it's Australia Day this Friday, but many government bodies seem to be wary of celebrating it. And even Cricket Australia isn't going to make a formal reference to Australia Day during the Gabba Test match on Friday. Instead, Code Sports report a ground host may acknowledge the day in passing, but that's going to be the only mention. Well, it's a move that New South Wales Premier Chris Minns didn't agree with. In fact, he condemned Cricket Australia's decision.
Australia Day is the 26th of January. It's an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the fact that we live in the greatest country on earth. I think they should revisit it. I hope they do. And I know I'll be celebrating Australia Day, and millions of other people after a tough couple of years will take the opportunity to spend time with family and friends as well.
All right, Indigenous leader Warren Mundine joins me now. Warren, thank you so much for your time. Look, was this brave, politically speaking, for a Labor Premier Chris Minns to defend Australia Day like this?
Well, it was, and I'm not surprised about Chris's stand. He's a friend of mine. He's a great bloke. and he has the opportunity to become a long-serving premier because he's a decent human being. And we heard Joe say that earlier, Joe Hildebrand. Look, it's weird to say this, and this is the continuation of these elites, of these haters of Australians and haters of Australia. Now, everyone knows I'm a bloke who supports shifting today, but there's one thing I will not tolerate, and that is the bigotry and the hatred of organisations like the Cricket Australia, like Woolworths, and all these corporations, who look at Australian people as knuckle draggers, as bigots, and dreadful stuff. And how do I know this? They all supported the Yes campaign, and they got flogged by the Australian people, and we're going to flog them again. Because we're getting sick and tired of these people who hate Australia. We got the most multicultural, most multi-faith, most incredible country in the world. In fact, we've got more multis than you can poke a stick at. And people have come to this country, and we're so proud of the migrants who have come here, whether they be Muslims or Christians or whatever, Jews or whatever, and even atheists. And they've built this country and made it great. Well, you know what the Cricket Australia have done? They've just spat in their face. That Cricket Australia and all the other bodies have just said, look, we're more, we're like the inner city elites, and we're more knowledgeable and more superior than the rest of Australia. Well, you know what? More than 67% of Australians want it to remain on the 26th. Now, as I said, I want it to be changed.
You want it to change, yeah.
But I don't. I'm just sick and tired of this annual attack on the values of this country.
Yeah. Look, whether it's on the 26th or another day, we should have a day where we can celebrate this incredible country where we all are so grateful to call home. Warren Mundine, you always talk so much sense. It's a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you. Still to come, Israel rejects a Hamas offer to end the war in Gaza. A high-profile Israeli spokesman will give us the inside detail in just a moment. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, while many political leaders in the West are demanding a ceasefire of Israel, they forget the young men and women who are still being held hostage. And right now, there are reports from the Jerusalem Post that Israeli medical personnel are planning for the possibility that some women could be coming home, if they come home, in various stages of pregnancy after their time in Hamas captivity. Elon Levy is an Israeli government spokesman, and he joins me live now from Israel. Elon, thank you so much for your time this evening. Look, while the international bodies, including the UN, turn away from the rape of Israeli girls, are these reports in the Jerusalem Post true that Israel is preparing for the return of some female hostages who might now be pregnant?
We know that the Hamas rapist regime perpetrated mass acts of sexual violence. On October 7th, acts of gang rape, paedophilia, even necrophilia, sexual mutilation. And we know as well from testimonies from survivors of the Hamas terror dungeons and doctors who have spoken to the press of a number of survivors who either experienced or witnessed sexual abuse, and the possibility that Hamas might be raping female hostages in its terror dungeons, and some of them might be pregnant, is one of the most horrific and nauseating things that I have ever heard.
It's just so sad, and those women are just so young and helpless. Yeah. One of the reasons Hamas is refusing to release them, potentially. Now, let's turn to the comments that Benjamin Netanyahu made overnight, that he rejected this deal from Hamas to release the hostages in return for Palestinian statehood. What precisely did Hamas offer, and why isn't this in Israel's best interests?
Well, of course, we want to get all the hostages home, and that is why we are continuing to put military pressure on Hamas to release them. But the terms, as reported in the Wall Street Journal, were essentially for an Israeli capitulation. According to that report, Hamas was offering to give back the hostages in exchange for Israel completely withdrawing from Gaza and returning to the lines of October 6th. Now, that would leave Hamas free to perpetrate atrocities like it did on October 7th, which it has spent day and night since then telling us it wants to do again and again. We have an obligation to let people go back to their homes. All those villages along the border where people were burned, beheaded, abducted, mutilated on October 7th, they need to sleep safely in their beds, and they can't do that. They can't do that if the Hamas terror regime is their neighbor and if Hamas feels free and emboldened to attack again. And that's why it's so important that we hear voices in the international community saying that this war has to end with Hamas's surrender. By the way, that is the position of the Australian government as well. I saw the joint statement from the Australian Prime Minister with the leaders of Canada and New Zealand saying Hamas must lay down its arms. There is no room for Hamas in a post-war Gaza, and that's why the European Parliament also passed a resolution by a very large majority saying there should only be a ceasefire after all the hostages are returned and Hamas is dismantled. Because everyone understands that if this war ends with Hamas still on its feet, it will drag us back into this cycle of violence with another massacre again.
Look, you mentioned the Australian government. The Jewish community here in Australia has been quite disappointed in the position the government has taken, its lack of leadership on anti-Semitism. But in terms of aid to the Palestinian territories, we've seen the Australian government, taxpayer money, commit $43 million since October 7, since the terror attacks. A lot of it, millions of dollars of it, to UNRWA. There are now concerns about how UNRWA has been spending its funds. Are you worried that some of our taxpayer funding and others from the international community may have been misused for terror?
Of course. We know that Hamas has been hijacking aid, and there are photos that have been circulating online of Hamas gunmen on top of those trucks. We know that Hamas is prioritizing its fighters and its terrorists over the well-being of civilians in Gaza. Now, we want to see humanitarian aid reach civilians in Gaza. That's why there's no limit on how much can enter through the Israeli crossings. But we have a problem that Hamas is hijacking aid, and the international agencies that are supposed to be looking out for civilians in Gaza have absolutely nothing to say about that. We know evidence of complicity between UNRWA and between Hamas. We know of Hamas tunnels that have popped up inside UNRWA facilities. We know of things that have been stolen from inside UNRWA compounds. And we think it's very important that there be international accountability, that the money that you are sending for civilians genuinely reach civilians and not be appropriated and hijacked by terrorists instead.
Such a concern. Look, are you also concerned about the fact that the Albanese government here in Australia has not yet officially designated the October 7 massacre as a terrorist attack?
The October 7 massacre was not only a terror attack, it is the bloodiest and deadliest terror attack in world history after 9/11. 1,200 people killed is as many who were murdered in the whole North Tower on 9/11. Now, it wasn't just a terror attack. This was an invasion. Hamas declared war with an invasion by air, land, and sea when they came into Israel, murdered so many people, and abducted them. And we need to hear our allies speak very firmly, condemning Hamas for those atrocities that it perpetrated on October 7th, and making it very clear that they stand by Israel's side as we fight this war, a war we didn't want, a war we didn't start, a war we didn't expect, a war that Hamas declared on us with that terror attack, and a war that we have to win. Because otherwise, if Hamas does not lay down its arms, whether it chooses to do so or whether we force it to do so, we're only going to see more violence. And that is something that we all want to avoid. And for that to happen, the Hamas terror regime has to fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Elon Levy, thank you very much for joining me from Israel tonight. Now, coming up, Anthony Albanese's broken promise on the Stage 3 tax cuts. All the details after the break. Welcome back. Well, for weeks, as you know, the Prime Minister has been evasive when asked whether his election promise on the Stage 3 tax cuts will still go ahead. Well, 2GB today revealed that the Albanese government is going to overhaul those Stage 3 tax cuts and that they're going to be very different to the ones that were taken to the election that have been legislated that Albanese has promised that he would fulfil. Let's bring in our Insiders political panel tonight. Director of Headline Advisory, Andrew Carswell, and Bill Shorten's former Chief of Staff, Director of GXO Strategies, Cameron Milner. Welcome to you both. Look, Cameron, this is clearly a broken promise. There's no question about it.
Look, it's the worst kept secret that Labor wanted to get rid of stage 3 tax cuts and jam themselves with their small target strategy into accepting them. But the Prime Minister has promised over and over and again that the position wasn't changing. Well, it's clearly going to change. It's clearly going to rip up the promise to the Australian people that he was going to keep on tax. And that's going to be a huge credibility issue, a huge integrity issue for the Prime Minister going forward.
Look, Andrew Carswell, not only is this a broken promise, but it's reintroducing class warfare. It means that Middle Australia is going to suffer more from inflation. Bracket creep keeps rising, cost of living pressures too, and they'll be getting less relief by the looks of it.
Yeah, Sharri, this is if this comes about, this will be a betrayal of Middle Australia. The very Middle Australia he made a pitch to, the Prime Minister made a pitch to before this election that this would be his promise. Now, even if the government could effectively explain their way, explain the reasoning and try and win back support in that way, which, they've shown no nous at communicating their policies in any effective manner. But even if they could effectively show why this needs to take place, Australians take a very dim view to political leaders and particularly prime ministers that break their promises and break their promises in such an overt way. And what this does is it gives the coalition a vital tool in the lead up to the next election. It's a very simple message that in the midst of a cost of living crisis, Labor put taxes up, because that's effectively what they're doing. This is legislated. They are putting taxes up. So this again shows some weakness here on the behalf of the PM. The people that I speak to in government say that this is not what the Prime Minister himself wants to do, but the left is getting loud. They're getting louder and louder and louder, and we will see a capitulation here from the Prime Minister, because that is the pattern that we've seen all along.
And look, these tax cuts aren't overly generous. They were just meant to be a correction to the bracket creep. Other countries around the world link the tax brackets to inflation, to CPI. We don't do that in Australia, and it's why people really feel that their wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living. But Cameron, the Prime Minister, also said that he's going to call back all of caucus, every MP, at a cost of millions of dollars to Canberra, presumably for this dressed up cost of living announcement. The Australian Jeff Chambers today also reported that Albanese has held more than 50 press conferences just in 1 month. This is the Dunkley by-election looms. Is this going to work for him? Is this going to turn around his fortunes?
Well, this is the guy who's hard at work while the rest of us are having beach holidays and reading summer books. Hopefully everyone noticed his hard time at work. The next 3 days is going to be pantomime. He's going to have the Cabinet tomorrow, caucus and the National Press Club speech on Thursday. And it's all going to be about him telling us about cost of living and cost of living pressures that the rest of us have been living for the last 18 months. While he was off talking about The Voice and travelling the world on Toto 1, we were living the cost of living. So in terms of him talking about an issue close to everyone's hearts, absolutely. Absolutely, it's the right thing for Labor to do. But to do it with a broken promise is a huge risk and a huge roll of the dice. And to your point, I don't think it's just the left. I mean, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has wanted this for a while too. He's been putting it out there in the press as well. So it's the right of the party as well as the left who haven't wanted stage 3 tax cuts, to be honoured. And Albo's now been trapped in that situation because he didn't have the courage to tell the Australian people before the election what he really wanted to do.
Andrew, part of this political strategy that Albo's running is to turn the supermarkets into villains, despite the fact, and I read the Woolworths and Coles annual report last week, their EBIT margin is just a slim 5 and 6%. That is relatively low compared to other industries. And we do live in a capitalist society. So how can the Albanese government try and pin this cost of living crisis on the supermarkets?
Well, Sharri, I love where the narrative has gone on this one. It's changed within a week. When the government first announced that they'd take a little bit of a bat to the supermarkets over cost of living, they did so quite tentatively. They said, they didn't want to give the appearance that it was any socialist hit at corporate Australia. They didn't want the extremes. But in a week, we're already seeing Labor MPs call for the PM to rein in the profits, quote, rein in the profits of the supermarkets. Now, as you said, the supermarkets run fairly leanly, and the other point is that the vast majority of profits that supermarkets make goes directly back into the pockets of Australians through superannuation. So there has been a shifting mood within Labor here. Maybe the true colours are coming out. Gone to the business suits that we saw at the start of this campaign against the supermarkets, and suddenly we're seeing berets and Sharri T-shirts.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Cameron Milner, Andrew Carswell. Really appreciate your time. Now, after the break, we'll look at the devastating new ways that scammers are stealing your money and what you can do to protect yourself. Well, more Australians are falling victim to increasingly sophisticated frauds that are netting criminals billions each year. Sky News can exclusively reveal changes to mandatory code obligations for providers to better protect customers and combat scammers. And investigations reporter Jonathan Lee is here to tell us more. Jonathan, what have you uncovered when you've examined the scams that are costing people so much money?
Well, Sharri, in fact, we're looking at around $3.1 billion in the year 2022. The government, this is an election promise, has made it clear they believe they're starting to curtail some of the drama. They actually believe there's been a 16% reduction in some of the scams. They actually have a consultation process which will wrap up next week as they work to introduce significantly new legislation towards the back half of this year. That will end up putting greater responsibility back on the banks, the telcos and also the digital players. It's the first time we've seen a whole of ecosystem style structure here which seeks to make sure that when it comes to consumers like you or I, there is a wall that protects us and make sure or ensures that there are mandatory standards when it comes to the delivery and protection of our critical data. Here's Stephen Jones, the Minister, when we spoke to him earlier this morning.
Modern banking, online commerce has revolutionised the way we do things. It means we no longer have to stand in queues at banks or have to wait for days or weeks for transactions to go through. So that's great, but it also means we can lose money quicker as well. So more friction in the system, particularly for out-of-character transactions.
Jonathan, the main question is whether victims are actually going to get reimbursed in all instances. This seems to be a bit hit and miss at the moment.
It certainly won't be the case. The government is much more focused on prevention rather than compensation. The United Kingdom has introduced a new system, or will later this year, why banks effectively will reimburse everyone who is scammed. Our government and the banking sector is very keen to make sure that doesn't happen here. They believe that simply makes the sector a honeypot for scammers. One of the big problems is a thing called SIM swapping or SIM porting, where people lose control of their mobile telephone. We caught up with a gentleman who nearly lost his life savings to the scam, and we'll explain a little more after about why it's significant.
This is life-changing because whoever this scammer is, he's got like a playbook and he plays it from the start to the finish. The little things first, and he works all the way through, taking out loans in my name. And I'd found out later that he knew the part of the password, but he didn't know just 2 digits, and otherwise they would have given him full access to my life savings. That was $100,000 in that account.
All right, Jonathan Lee, thanks for that report, and we'll catch it on Sky News tomorrow morning. Now, you can also head to the Sky News website for my exclusive tapes if you missed them from the start of the show, into how teachers are planning on bringing the Middle East war into the classroom. But right now, here's Paul Murray.